I was born into a family where love was supposed to be the foundation, but in my house, favoritism and silent cruelty ruled instead. I was the eldest daughter, yet from the very beginning, I learned that my place in the family was not the cherished one. My parents had already chosen their favorite, the golden child, my younger sister. I too wasn't that they outright hated me. No, it was something worse. It was the indifference, the cold shrug of a shoulder when I did something worth celebrating. When I brought home good grades, there was no smile, no praise. Just a half-hearted nod, as if my achievements were obligations and not milestones. But when my sister sang a simple nursery rhyme in her squeaky little voice, my parents clapped as if they were watching a Broadway performance. As a child, you don't fully understand favoritism, you just feel the sting of being unseen. I tried harder. I thought, maybe if I cleaned up after dinner, maybe if I helped my mother fold the laundry, maybe if I was quiet and obedient, they would finally notice me. But the truth was, no matter how much I bent myself to fit their expectations, I would never be her. I would never be my sister. I remember one summer when I was about 10 years old. I had spent weeks preparing a drawing for the school art competition. I poured my heart into it, shading carefully, making sure the colors blended just right. When I came home with the certificate that declared me the first place winner, I thought just maybe this would be my moment. My parents would smile at me the way they smiled at her. Instead, my mother barely looked up from her tea and muttered, "That's nice. But you know, your sister has her piano recital tomorrow. Don't bother her with this right now." My father didn't even glance at my certificate. He was too busy adjusting my sister's piano notes, nodding proudly at every clumsy note she struck. That night, as I tucked my certificate under my pillow, I made myself a promise. If they weren't going to clap for me, then one day I would build a life where their applause wouldn't matter. But as a child, those promises feel like whispers in the dark. And the truth was, I still wanted them to love me. Growing up, holidays were the hardest. Birthdays, family gatherings, occasions that should have been filled with joy always carried a shadow for me. My sister's birthdays were elaborate. Cakes taller than her, balloons filling the living room, and relatives coming over with gifts piled high. Mine? A simple cake, sometimes not even a gift. My mother once told me, "You're older now, you don't need all this fuss." I was 12. Still, I tried to shrug it off. I tried to convince myself that being the older child meant being stronger, more independent. Maybe that was my role, to carry myself without help. But deep down, I was just a little girl wanting her parents to look at her the way they looked at her sister. My sister, let's call her Clara, she basked in their attention. She wasn't cruel in the beginning, not exactly. But children know when they're favored, and Clara learned to use it. She would tease me when no one was watching, tugging at my hair, mocking me with whispers like, "MOM and Dad love me more." When I told my parents, they brushed it off. "Don't be jealous of your sister," they said, as if I were the problem. It wasn't jealousy. It was grief. By the time I reached high school, the distance between us had turned into a canyon. My parents pushed all their resources into Clara's talents, her piano lessons, her expensive dresses, her endless list of hobbies. I worked part-time jobs to buy my own school supplies. They claimed it was to teach me responsibility, but I knew better. Responsibility wasn't the lesson, they simply didn't care enough. Still, I survived. I built myself on scraps of self-worth, on the determination that if my family couldn't love me, I'd find love elsewhere, someday. Looking back, I realize now that the seeds of my strength were planted in that neglect. Every dismissal, every cold glance, every moment of being overlooked, it all hardened me piece by piece. And while I didn't know it yet, that strength would be the only thing that saved me years later, when my daughter's screams echoed through the house and my family turned their backs once again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, just understand this. I grew up in a family where I was alive, but invisible. And sometimes invisibility hurts worse than hate. I always believed that family was supposed to be your safe place. The people who catch you when you fall, who hold you when the world turns its back. But for me, family was something very different. I was born the first daughter, the one who should have paved the way, the one who carried the weight of expectations. But almost from the moment I could walk, I realized I wasn't the daughter my parents wanted to hold on to. They saved their love, their smiles, their pride for my younger sister, Clara. From the outside, we looked like any ordinary family. A father with a respectable job, a mother who kept the home tidy, and two little girls. People who visited would often comment, "Oh, you're so lucky to have two daughters. They must bring so much joy." My parents would smile, but their eyes would always flicker toward Clara, not me. I felt it in small ways at first. The way my mother's face lit up when Clara toddled into the room, even if she was sticky with jam and had mud on her shoes. When I walked in, the only words I heard were, "Close the door behind you. Don't track dirt on the floor." I was 7 the first time it hit me like a stone. My school held a reading competition, and I had practiced every night, whispering passages under the blanket with a flashlight. I won first place. When they called my name and handed me that little golden ribbon, I thought my heart would burst with pride. I couldn't wait to show my parents. I raced home, clutching the ribbon, practically skipping through the door. My mother was in the kitchen, chopping onions. Mom. Look. I held the ribbon up high, grinning so wide my cheeks hurt. She glanced for half a second before turning back to the cutting board. "That's nice," she said flatly. "Don't leave your shoes there. Put them by the door." The air in my chest deflated. I stood there for a moment, hoping she'd change her tone, hoping she'd ask me about it. But she didn't. Clara walked in right then, humming some silly tune, and suddenly Mom's voice was sugar sweet. "Clara, darling, you're glowing today. Did you sing that in class? Show me." I remember looking down at that ribbon in my hands. My vision blurred. It wasn't that I wanted Clara to lose her moment, it was that I wanted one too. Just one. That was the first of many times. By the time I was 10, I had already figured out the rules of my household. Clara was the shining star, the one whose laugh filled rooms, the one who deserved attention. I was background, a shadow. I could achieve, I could work hard, I could try to earn their approval, but it was like shouting into an empty canyon. Still, I didn't stop trying. Children are resilient that way. We keep knocking on doors even when we know no one will open them. One summer, my school announced an art competition. I had always loved drawing. Pencils and colors gave me freedom that I never found in words at home. I spent weeks sketching, erasing, coloring. I stayed up late at night, hunched over the dining table after everyone else had gone to bed, carefully shading in details. When the competition came, I was nervous but determined. I poured myself into that drawing as if it were my heartbeat on paper. And when I won, when they called my name and handed me a certificate declaring me first place, I thought, this is it. This is finally my chance. I remember running home, clutching that certificate like treasure. My father was in the living room, reading the newspaper, and my mother was adjusting Clara's piano notes. Dad, MOM. I won. I held out the paper, my hands trembling with excitement. My mother barely looked up. That's good, but don't wave things in your father's face. He's reading. My father lowered the paper just enough to glance at the certificate. Art. That's nice. His voice was lukewarm, distant. He turned back to the paper without another word. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Clara was sitting at the piano, swinging her legs. She smirked. I have a recital tomorrow. MOM says mine is more important. The word stuck worse than a slap. That night, I tucked the certificate under my pillow. I whispered to myself, one day, they'll regret not clapping for me. It was a promise, though at the time, it felt like a fragile dream. Holidays made the favoritism undeniable. Clara's birthdays were spectacles, balloons, cake, relatives gathered, with wrapped gifts stacked so high they nearly touched the ceiling. My birthdays. A cake, sometimes homemade, sometimes store-bought if they remembered. Gifts were scarce. My mother once told me, "You're older now. You don't need so much fuss." I was 12. At 12, you still need fuss. At 12, you still want to feel special. It wasn't just the birthdays. It was every little thing. When Clara wanted a new dress, my parents took her shopping, bought her something shiny and expensive. When I asked for new shoes because mine had holes, my father said, "You can last another year." You're not growing that fast. Clara learned quickly how to use it. She'd tug at my hair when no one was looking, whisper cruel things when we were alone. MOM and Dad loved me more. When I told my parents, they didn't scold her. They scolded me. Don't be jealous of your sister. Stop making up stories. It wasn't jealousy. It was grief. By high school, the divide had grown into a chasm. My parents poured money into Clara's hobbies, her piano lessons, her dance classes, her endless needs. For me, I got responsibility. They said working part-time jobs to buy my own supplies would build character, but what it really built was a wall between us. I remember once, during my final exams, I asked my father if he could buy me a set of textbooks I couldn't afford. He sighed heavily, like my request was a burden. Do you know how expensive Clara's lessons are? Be grateful we keep a roof over your head. So I worked. I stacked shelves at a corner store, babysat neighbors' kids, scrubbed dishes in a diner kitchen just to buy those books. And when I finally sat down for those exams, I studied harder than I ever had. Because deep down, I was determined to build a life where I would never have to beg them again. Still, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the ache. Every time I walked into a room and saw them beam at Clara, my chest tightened. I wanted that look. I wanted that love. But it was never mine. Looking back, I see it clearly. They didn't just neglect me, they erased me. I was there, but I wasn't seen. Alive, but invisible. And that invisibility carved something into me. It built a fire, one that smoldered quietly for years. Because while I didn't know it yet, one day, that fire would become the very thing that saved me. One day, when my own daughter's life was hanging in the balance, and my parents once again turned their backs, that fire would rise. And this time, I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't cry for their love. I would make them regret the day they ever chose to turn away. When I finally left my parents' house, it felt less like moving out and more like escaping a prison I'd been locked in for too long. I still remember The way my father handed me a single envelope with a few bills inside, like it was some great act of generosity. "Don't expect much more from us," he had said coldly. "You've always wanted to be on your own. Now's your chance." On the outside, I nodded, thanked him, and carried my suitcase out the door. But inside, I was shaking. I wasn't ready for the world. How could I be? I was only 18, with no real safety net, no encouragement, and no one to fall back on. And yet, there was also a small spark of relief. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to sit at a dinner table where every smile belonged to Clara. I didn't have to compete for scraps of affection. I could finally start writing my own story. The early years were brutal. I worked every job I could find: waitressing, cleaning offices late at night, tutoring younger kids in math just to keep the lights on in my little rented room. There were days I came home so exhausted I fell asleep in my clothes, but even when I had nothing, even when my fridge held only a carton of milk and half a loaf of bread, I felt freer than I ever had at my parents' house. Poverty was easier to bear than being invisible. It was during those years that I met Daniel. Daniel was different. He wasn't flashy or arrogant. He didn't have the kind of wealth or charm that my parents would have admired. But he had something far rarer. He saw me, truly saw me. I met him at the library, of all places. I was buried under piles of textbooks, trying to keep my grades up while juggling work. He slid into the seat across from me one day, flashing a crooked smile. "You look like you're fighting a war with those books," he said. I remember looking up, annoyed at first, but something about his voice made me laugh. It had been a long time since I had laughed without forcing it. One conversation turned into two into weeks, and weeks into months. Daniel wasn't like my parents. He didn't compare me to anyone else. He didn't ask me to prove my worth. He simply believed in me. When he held my hand for the first time, I felt a warmth I had never known. When he kissed me, I realized just how starved I had been, not for romance, but for tenderness. For someone who looked at me as if I was enough. We married young, too young by my parents' standards. They didn't even come to the wedding. My mother's exact words were, "Why would we waste time on a small ceremony for someone who doesn't listen to us?" My father didn't even look at me. Claire laughed when she found out, tossing her hair like it was all some sort of joke. It hurt. But Daniel squeezed my hand and whispered, "It's their loss, not yours." And he was right. Because when our daughter was born, I finally understood what love really meant. I still remember the first time I held her. Her tiny fingers curled around mine, her cries filling the sterile hospital room. She was so small, so fragile, and yet she carried a weight so immense it was as if all the love I had been denied my entire life was finally pouring out of me, overflowing, unstoppable. We named her Emily. From the moment I looked into her eyes, I swore she would never know what it felt like to be invisible. She would never beg for love. She would never question her worth. If the world turned its back on her, I would still be there. Her shield, her home, her safe place. Emily became my whole world. Every giggle, every little milestone felt like magic. The first time she said "Mama," I cried, not because it was a milestone, but because it was the first time in my life someone had called me something that meant love. I worked hard, sometimes to the point of exhaustion, but I never resented it. Every hour I spent waitressing, every night I stayed up finishing work after she went to sleep, it was all worth it to keep a roof over her head, to buy her the toys she wanted, to see her smile. Danielle and I weren't rich, but we built something solid, something real. We laughed at dinner. We told Emily stories before bed. We turned our tiny apartment into a place of warmth and love. And yet, even in the happiness of those years, my family's shadow lingered. When Emily turned 3, I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would soften. I brought her over to meet them, thinking a grandchild might melt their hardened hearts. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope, but hope is dangerous when it comes to people who have only ever let you down. The first time they saw Emily, my mother gave a tight smile, patted her head, and immediately turned to Clara. "Your sister brought her daughter. But don't worry, Clara, you'll have children of your own soon, and they'll be perfect." Clara laughed, flicking her hair over her shoulder, as if Emily were nothing more than a shadow in the corner. My father glanced at her and muttered something about messy toddlers. It cut me deeply. Not for myself this time, but for my daughter. Emily deserved grandparents who adored her, who spoiled her with love. But instead, she got coldness. The same coldness I had known all my life. That day, as I buckled Emily into her car seat, she asked me, "Mama, why didn't Grandma hug me?" I swallowed hard. "Because Grandma doesn't know how to give good hugs," I whispered, forcing a smile. Inside, my heart cracked. As Emily grew, my family's neglect became harder to ignore. They still favored Clara, showering her with attention, bragging about her every move. If Clara caught a cold, my mother rushed over with soup. When Emily had a fever, I managed alone, sitting by her bed all night with a wet cloth, whispering prayers into the dark. Daniel noticed. He once asked me, "Why do you keep trying with them? They've shown you who they are." I didn't have an answer. Maybe because some part of me still wanted what every daughter wants: a mother's embrace, a father's pride, a sister's love. Maybe I thought if I just kept showing up, one day they'd finally open the door. But doors like that don't open. Not for people like me. Still, I kept them in our lives, at least in small ways. Birthdays, holidays, occasional visits. I told myself it was for Emily's sake, so she'd at least know she had grandparents. I didn't realize then how dangerous that decision would become, because years later, when Emily's scream of pain echoed through our house after her leg snapped on the porch, and I begged my parents and Clara for help, they refused. They refused to take my daughter to the and in that moment, everything I had buried from my childhood came rushing back. The neglect, the favoritism, the invisibility. Only this time, it wasn't me they erased. It was my child, and that was something I would never forgive. They say motherhood changes you. It's true. Becoming a mother cracked me open in ways I never thought possible. My heart, which had once been hardened by neglect, softened when I looked into Emily's eyes. But it also sharpened my instincts, especially when it came to my family. I began to notice things more clearly. The patterns, the favoritism, the way history was starting to repeat itself. Only this time, Emily was the one being overlooked. It started small, in the way cruelty always does. At family gatherings, Clara would sweep into the room, perfectly dressed, her voice loud and commanding. My parents orbited around her like she was the sun. "Clara, how is work? Clara, you look stunning. Clara, tell us about your new project." Meanwhile, Emily and I sat quietly in the corner. Sometimes Emily tried to show them her drawings, scribbled little houses with lopsided roofs and stick figures holding hands. My mother would glance at them and say, "That's nice, dear, before immediately turning to gush about Clara's latest shopping spree. I watched the light dim in Emily's eyes. I knew that look too well. It was the same one I'd carried throughout my childhood. That flicker of why am I not enough? It enraged me. One afternoon, when Emily was about 5, she performed a small dance she had learned in kindergarten. She twirled clumsily in the living room, her arms spread wide, her little feet stomping in rhythm. She was beaming, waiting for applause. My father chuckled dryly. She's energetic. I'll give her that. But Clara's dance classes at her age were much more polished. My mother nodded in agreement. Yes, Clara was always graceful. Some kids just don't have the natural gift. Emily froze mid-step. I saw her lower lip tremble. She ran to me, burying her face in my lap. I kissed her head and whispered, "You were perfect, baby." But inside, I was boiling. I snapped. "You two did the same thing to me," I hissed. At my parents. "I will not let you do it to her." My mother raised her eyebrows as if I were being dramatic. "Don't be so sensitive. Children need to hear the truth." "No," I shot back. "Children need love." "But you wouldn't know what that looks like, would you?" The room went silent. Clara smirked, sipping her drink like it was all a show, staged for her amusement. That was the moment I realized I was no longer the little girl begging for their attention. I was a mother, and I would burn the world down before I let them break my daughter the way they broke me. But it didn't stop there. The comparisons became constant. If Emily wore a dress I had bought her, my mother would say, "Clara would never wear something so plain at her age." If Emily got a certificate from school, my father would remark, "Well, Clara had a whole shelf of awards." Clara herself played into it, subtly at first, then more openly. She'd lean down to Emily and say, "When I was little, Grandma and Grandpa always said I was the best. You have to try much harder if you want to be like me." I confronted her once, when we were alone in the kitchen. "Why do you talk to her like that? She's just a child." Clara shrugged, a smug smile on her lips. "Maybe she should learn early. Life isn't fair. Besides, don't pretend you didn't grow up jealous of me." Some things never change. Her words cut deep. Not because they were true, but because they revealed how twisted her sense of pride was. She thrived on being favored, even at the expense of others, and my parents. They encouraged it. I began to limit contact. I made excuses not to attend every family dinner, every holiday gathering. But I still went sometimes, because a part of me foolishly hoped things might change, and because I didn't want Emily to feel cut off from the idea of family. Daniel noticed the toll it was taking on me. One night, after Emily was asleep, he sat beside me on the couch and said softly, "You know you don't owe them anything, right?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I know, but it's complicated. They're my parents. Parents in name." He corrected gently, not in action. "Real parents don't treat their children like this." I knew he was right, but cutting ties felt impossible. There was a chain between us, forged in blood and years of longing, and I couldn't break it. Not yet. The breaking point came during Emily's 7th birthday. We decided to have a small party at my parents' house because I thought naively that maybe involving them would make them show up for her. We decorated the living room with balloons. A cake sat on the table, and Emily wore a little crown on her head. She was glowing with excitement. Then Clara arrived. Late, of course, sweeping in like a queen. My parents lit up the moment she entered. My mother rushed to hug her. My father poured her a drink. No one even looked at Emily. I clapped my hands loudly. Everyone, can we sing happy birthday to Emily now? They did, half-heartedly, their voices flat. Afterward, my mother turned to Clara. So, how's your new promotion? Tell us all about it. The rest of the evening was spent fawning over Clara's stories, her career, her looks. Emily sat quietly at the table, staring at her untouched slice of cake. When we got home, she asked me in a small voice, "Mama, why do Grandma and Grandpa love Auntie more than me?" I pulled her into my arms, tears stinging my eyes. "It's not you, baby. It's them. They don't know how to love properly. But I do. And Daddy does. And that's what matters." But deep down, I felt the rage simmering. That night, I stared at the ceiling long after Daniel fell asleep. I realized that every time I allowed my parents and Clara into Emily's life, I was opening the same wound they had carved into me. I was letting them poison her self-worth, just like they had poisoned mine. I told myself then I would never let them break her, but I didn't know how soon that vow would be tested, because 1 year later, the unthinkable happened. Emily broke her leg, and when I begged my family to help, to take us to the ER, they refused. They left my daughter screaming in pain, and that was the day everything inside me snapped. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind that should have been filled with warmth and laughter. Emily was 8 by then, full of boundless energy. She loved running around the backyard at my parents' house, chasing butterflies, climbing the old wooden porch railings, pretending she was an explorer on some grand adventure. I didn't want to be there that day. Every fiber of me resisted walking back into that house, but Daniel had gently suggested, maybe one more chance, for Emily's sake. So I agreed. We arrived just before lunch. Clara was already there, lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone as my parents fussed over her, offering her drinks and snacks as if she were royalty. I set a small bag of homemade pastries on the table, something I'd baked that morning, but no one touched them. Emily, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension, darted outside to play. Her laughter echoed through the yard, bright and carefree. For a moment, I let myself breathe. But then it happened. A sharp, high-pitched scream tore through the air. My heart stopped. I rushed outside, my chest tightening with dread. Emily was lying on the ground near the porch, clutching her leg, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her cries were raw, piercing, the kind that sent chills through every nerve in my body. "Mama, it hurts. It hurts," she sobbed. I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands trembling as I touched her leg. It was bent at an angle no leg should ever bend. My stomach lurched. She had fallen from the porch railing, and she was in agony. I screamed for help. "Dad, Mom. Clara, please, she needs to go to the ER now." They came to the doorway, but their faces were blank, almost annoyed. My mother crossed her arms. "She's crying too much. It's probably just a sprain." "A sprain?" My voice cracked with desperation. "Look at her leg. She can't move it, she can't stand. We have to take her to the hospital." My father sighed, shaking his head as if I were being dramatic. "You always overreact. Kids fall all the time. Let her rest, she'll be fine," Emily wailed louder, clutching my arm. "Mama, please. It hurts so bad." I looked at Clara, hoping, praying for just a shred of compassion. But she rolled her eyes and smirked. "Why should we all rush around because your kid can't handle a little fall? You've always been so dramatic. Maybe you should learn to toughen her up." Something inside me snapped. "This is my daughter," I screamed, my voice shaking. She needs a hospital. She could lose her leg if we don't act now. But they just stood there, cold, unmoved. My mother muttered, "We're not wasting our Saturday driving across town for your dramatics. If you think she needs a hospital, take her yourself." I looked down at Emily, her face twisted in pain, her little hands gripping me as if I were the only anchor she had in the world. My heart broke into 1,000 shards, and in that moment, I knew. They didn't just fail me as parents, they were failing her as grandparents. They weren't indifferent. They were cruel. With tears blurring my vision, I lifted Emily into my arms. She screamed in pain as her leg shifted, and I whispered frantically, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Just hold on." Daniel rushed to start the car, but before I left, I turned back to them, my parents, my sister, the people who were supposed to be my family. "You will regret this," I whispered, my voice shaking not from fear, but from fury. Then I carried my daughter out of that house. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Emily whimpered in the back seat, clutching my hand. Every bump in the road made her cry out. I bit my lip so hard it bled, trying not to scream myself. When we finally arrived, doctors and nurses rushed to us immediately. They took one look at Emily's leg, and their faces grew grim. "She has a severe fracture," the doctor said after the X-rays. "It's good you brought her quickly. Any more delay, and the damage could have been much worse. She might have needed surgery or worse." The words hit me like a knife. Much worse. If I had listened to my parents, if I had stayed in that living room while they dismissed my daughter's pain, Emily might have lost her ability to walk. I sat in the hospital corridor, my body trembling, my mind replaying every second. The image of them standing there, arms crossed, unmoved by her screams, it burned into me. And as I watched Emily sleep later that night, her leg in a cast, her little body exhausted from the ordeal, something solidified inside me. I would never forgive them. This wasn't just neglect anymore. This wasn't favoritism or indifference. This was cruelty. Cold, deliberate cruelty. They had shown me who they truly were. Not just bad parents. Not just unfair. But people who could look at a child in agony, my child, and do nothing. That night, I held Emily's hand and whispered a new promise. "Baby, I will protect you. Always. And I swear to you I will make them regret the day they chose to turn their backs on you." It was no longer about me. It was no longer about the invisible little girl I had been. This was about my daughter, about her safety, her dignity, her worth, and I knew, in that sterile hospital room with the smell of antiseptic thick in the air, that my revenge had begun. The hospital room was dim, just the soft glow of a night lamp flickering against the sterile white walls. Emily lay curled up in the hospital bed, her legs suspended in a cast, her breathing slow and uneven from the sedatives. I sat by her side, my hand clasping hers. My thumb traced little circles on her tiny fingers, a habit I'd developed when she was a baby and couldn't sleep. It used to soothe her. Tonight, it was more for me than for her. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. But inside me, there was no silence. There was a storm. Every scream Emily had let out still rang in my ears. Every cold word from my parents and Clara echoed in my mind. The image of them standing in that doorway, arms crossed, eyes dismissive, was seared into me like a scar. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to them. I had worked harder, loved deeper, carried their neglect like a silent burden. All because I thought maybe one day they would finally choose to see me, But tonight, it all crumbled. They didn't just refuse to see me, they refused to see my daughter. I leaned forward, resting my forehead on Emily's little hand, and the tears finally came. Not the quiet tears of a child yearning for approval. These were heavier, darker. Tears of anger. Tears of finality. I whispered so softly, only she and I could hear. Never again. I'll never let them near you again. And I'll never let them forget what they did tonight. Daniel came back into the room around midnight, holding 2 cups of vending machine coffee. His eyes were tired, worried, but he tried to offer a small smile. "She's stable," he said quietly, setting the cups down. "The doctors say kids heal fast. She'll be okay." I nodded, but my chest still ached. Daniel sat down across from me, his hands rubbing his face. "I still can't believe it," he muttered. "Your parents, your sister, how could they just stand there?" I stared at the floor. "Because they don't care," I said flatly. My voice surprised even me, so cold, so certain. They never cared about me. And tonight, they proved they'll never care about Emily either. Daniel leaned forward. "So what now? What do you want to do?" What did I want? A part of me wanted to scream at them, confront them, demand answers. But another part of me, the stronger part, knew it was useless. They had made their choice. Words wouldn't change them. No. What I wanted was something deeper, something lasting. "I want them to feel what I felt tonight," I whispered. "I want them to know what it's like to beg for help and be ignored. To watch everything they think they've built slip away." Daniel studied me for a long moment. "Revenge?" The word tasted bitter, but it was true. "Yes," I said firmly. "Revenge." The next morning, Emily woke up groggy, her little face pale but calmer. When she saw me by her side, she gave me a weak smile. "Mama, you didn't leave me." My chest tightened. I kissed her forehead. "Never, baby. I'll never leave you." "Not like them." She frowned slightly. "Grandma didn't come." I forced a smile. "No, and you don't need her. You've got me. That's enough." But inside, those words burned. She still wanted them. She still wondered about them. My daughter, innocent, forgiving, didn't understand the poison they carried. And that's when it hit me. My revenge wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting her. About making sure she would never again look at those people with hope in her eyes. About tearing away the illusion of family they had clung to for so long. If they wanted to cast me aside, fine. But they had cast aside my daughter too. And for that, I would make sure they paid. That night, as Emily drifted back to sleep, I sat by the window of the hospital room, staring out at the city lights. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, tired, broken, but with something new simmering behind my eyes. Resolve. I thought of every moment leading up to this. The birthdays forgotten, the holidays overshadowed, the years of Clara's favoritism. And now, the final straw, Emily's pain dismissed like nothing. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the invisible daughter, the one they could ignore without consequence. But they were wrong. They had underestimated me my entire life. And now, for the first time, I realized that was my greatest weapon, because they would never see me coming. And so, in that sterile hospital room, with my daughter asleep, and my heart still bleeding from betrayal, I made the choice. I would take back my power, piece by piece. And when I was done, they would look around and realize that everything they thought was secure, every ounce of comfort, every illusion of control was gone. And then they would remember me, the daughter they dismissed, the mother they betrayed, the woman who refused to forgive. The first week in the hospital was the hardest. Emily cried at night when the pain fled, clutching her stuffed rabbit while I sat beside her, whispering lullabies I hadn't sung since she was a toddler. During the day, she tried to be brave. She practiced smiling when the nurses came in, even though her little face was pale and her eyes always glistened with tears. She wouldn't let fall. Kids are so much stronger than we give them credit for, and maybe that's when something shifted in me. Watching her resilience, watching her fight through pain without complaint, it lit a fire in me. If my daughter could face this with courage, then I had no excuse to wallow in heartbreak. I needed to be strong not just for her survival, but for her future. The hospital staff became my allies without even realizing it. There was Nurse Kelly, who slipped me extra blankets when she saw how cold I looked at night. Dr. Patel, who explained every detail of Emily's injury with patience, never once treating me like I was hysterical or dramatic the way my parents always had. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as the invisible daughter, but as a mother fighting for her child, and it reminded me that there were good people in the world. That my family's cruelty wasn't the rule, it was the exception. But still, every time I thought of that night there, crossed arms, their dismissive words, the anger returned, sharp as glass. I knew I couldn't live with it bottled up. Not this time. When Emily was finally discharged, I carried her into our home like she was a piece of glass I could never risk breaking again. Daniel had prepared her room with pillows, blankets, even little fairy lights around the headboard to cheer her up. She squealed in delight when she saw it, the pain momentarily forgotten. "Daddy, it looks like a princess room." Daniel winked. "Well, that's because you are a princess." I smiled, but inside, I was already plotting. The first step wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, almost invisible. I blocked their numbers, my parents, Clara, every possible way they could reach me. For years, I had left the door cracked open, answering their rare calls, showing up at their cold family dinners, hoping for some scrap of affection. But after that night, the door wasn't just closed. It was locked, sealed shut. If they wanted me, they would have to come searching. And by the time they did, I promised myself, they would find nothing but the wreckage of the pedestal they had built for themselves. But I also knew revenge required patience. Striking too soon would only give them the satisfaction of calling me emotional or unstable. No, if I was going to do this, it had to be smart, calculated. As I waited, I spent my days focused on Emily's recovery, helping her learn to walk again with crutches, cheering her on every step, rewarding her bravery with ice cream sundaes and movie nights. She was my priority. But in the quiet hours, when she slept and Daniel dozed off on the couch, I began piecing together the blueprint of my revenge. I wrote in a journal, listing every slight, every betrayal, every moment they had tried to strip me of dignity. The page filled fast, each memory pouring out like poison, leaving my body. Then I wrote another list, every weakness they had, Clara's vanity, my parents' obsession with reputation, their hunger for control, and as the lists grew, so did my resolve. They had chosen to abandon me and my child in our darkest moment. Fine. Now, I would take everything they valued most, piece by piece, until the day they finally understood that dismissing me, the invisible daughter, was the greatest mistake they ever made. I didn't know exactly how yet, but the plan was forming slowly, like a storm on the horizon, and deep down, I could already feel it. The day was coming when they would cry out for help, and I would be the one standing in the doorway, arms crossed, silent, unmoved. Revenge is not a single act. It's not slamming a door in someone's face or shouting words that sting for a few seconds. True revenge is patient. It's deliberate. It's craft piece by piece, until, by the time your enemies realize what's happening, it's already too late. I knew that if I wanted to bring my parents and Clara down, I couldn't do it through rage. Rage would only make me reckless. I needed power, and so, while Emily was learning to walk again, I began building my arsenal. The first weapon was financial independence. For too long, my family had looked down on me for not having their kind of money. They made me feel like I was less because I didn't lean on their wealth, their connections. But that night at the hospital taught me a lesson. Money wasn't just comfort, it was freedom. It was protection. And it was a weapon. So I threw myself into work with a new kind of fire. I took on more clients in my small interior design business, worked late nights after Emily fell asleep, learned new software, marketed myself online. Within months, my reputation grew. Word spread, people loved my work, my attention to detail, my reliability. Clients referred me to their friends, and soon I was juggling projects I never dreamed I'd land. The money started to flow, not in torrents at first, but in steady streams. Enough to pay off debts, enough to build savings, enough to feel the ground beneath my feet grow solid, and every dollar I earned without them was a declaration. I don't need you. I never did. The second weapon was influence. My parents thrived on reputation. They cared about how the community saw them more than they ever cared about how their own daughter felt. They were the respected couple, the ones with polished smiles and carefully crafted appearances. As I decided to become visible, I volunteered at Emily's school, joined local community events, started giving free workshops on home design. My name began to circulate. My face appeared in local magazines, and slowly, people began to see me not as the forgotten daughter, but as someone in her own right. And I could feel it. With every handshake, every new connection, I was slipping out of their shadow and into my own light. The third weapon was knowledge. I began quietly digging. Not obsessively, not recklessly, patiently. I kept my eyes and ears open. Clara's social media was a goldmine. She flaunted everything, her expensive purchases, her perfect life, her parties. But in between the staged photos, I spotted cracks. A designer handbag she claimed was new, but was actually last season's clearance. A vacation photo didn't quite match the timeline she boasted about. Lies, small but telling, my parents. They weren't as careless. But even they slipped sometimes. Gossip from neighbors, whispers about financial strains they tried to hide, hints of debts and business deals that weren't as stable as they pretended. I didn't pounce on these cracks. Not yet. I just recorded them. Notebooks, files, screenshots. Quietly gathering puzzle pieces. Because one day, I would put the pieces together into a picture that would shatter everything they built. And through it all, Emily was my anchor. Her recovery was slow, but she amazed me. She learned to use her crutches without complaint, decorated them with stickers, and even giggled as she showed me her crutch dance. Her laughter healed me in ways I didn't know I needed. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Mama, you're my hero." Tears burned my eyes. Because she didn't know that everything I was doing, all the late nights, all the planning, all the quiet fury was for her. She would never beg for their love the way I had. She would never cry invisible tears in the dark. She would know her worth, because I was building a world where the rejection would mean nothing. By the end of that year, I was no longer the same woman who had carried her daughter out of my parents' house in tears. I was stronger. I was sharper. I was ready, and though my family didn't know it yet, I was already moving my first chess pieces. They thought they had silenced me, but the truth was, I had only just found my voice, and when I finally spoke, it would be loud enough to shake the foundations of their perfect little world. By the time Emily was walking again, still limping, but stronger every day, I had built myself into someone my family no longer recognized, and that was exactly the point. Revenge doesn't start with fireworks. It starts with whispers, with small, deliberate cuts that bleed slowly until the victim doesn't realize how deep the wound goes until it's too late. So I turned my attention to Clara, the golden child, the one who basked in their attention while I was invisible, the one who rolled her eyes at my daughter's agony. If anyone deserved to fall first, it was her. Clara's world revolved around appearances. She lived for social media likes, for people envying her perfect life. But beneath the filters and designer clothes, I knew she was reckless, impulsive, dependent, and I also knew that people like Clara eventually trip over their own lies if you give them the right push. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One evening, as I scrolled through her latest Instagram post, a picture of her sipping champagne at some rooftop bar, I noticed something odd in the background. A man. Not her fiancé. He was leaning in close, his hand grazing hers in a way that was far from innocent. I zoomed in, my heart pounding. It was subtle, easily missed. But I knew. And suddenly, all those whispers I'd overheard about Clara's two convenient engagements and sudden breakups clicked into place. She wasn't the flawless golden child. She was messy, careless, and I could use that. I didn't confront her. No, that would have been too obvious, too satisfying for her, because she would have twisted it, painted me as jealous or obsessed. Instead, I let the information breathe. A week later, at a community fundraiser where half the town seemed to be gathered, I casually mentioned to an acquaintance that I'd bumped into Clara at that rooftop bar. I said it lightly, almost innocently, as if it were nothing. But I made sure to add, she wasn't alone, though. I thought she was engaged. I smiled. I sipped my drink. I moved on. But I knew how gossip worked. It didn't need my help to spread, and spread it did. Within days, little cracks appeared in Clara's glossy image. Her fiancé grew cold toward her, friends stopped liking every post, whispers followed her when she walked into rooms. I watched from a distance, saying nothing, just observing as her carefully crafted perfection began to wobble. She still posted her filtered photos, still pretended her life was flawless. But the comments shifted. Less admiration, more side eyes, and I knew it was working. One evening, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance. Hey, I probably shouldn't ask this, but is it true about Clara that she's been stepping out on her fiancé? I paused, letting silence hang for just a beat too long. Then I sighed, a weary, practiced sigh. I don't want to get involved, I murmured. Family is complicated, but sometimes what people show online isn't the full truth. It was all I needed to say. The seed was planted, the soil was rich, and the weeds began to grow. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one standing in the shadows, overlooked and dismissed. No, now I was the one pulling strings, hidden in plain sight. And Clara, she didn't even know the game had started. That night, after tucking Emily in, I sat at my desk, flipping through the notebook where I kept every detail of my family's lives. Every weakness, every inconsistency. I ran my fingers over Clara's page, where I had circled the word emit 3 times. It was her pride, her obsession, her shield, and I had just cracked it. A smile tugged at my lips. Not of joy. Joy felt too soft for what I carried. No, it was satisfaction. Quiet, sharp, the kind of satisfaction that comes when the first domino falls. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning, because if I could topple Clara's perfect little world with one whisper, imagine what I could do with the storm I was building. Clara had always thrived on control. She curated her life like a glossy magazine, perfect angles, perfect outfits, perfect friends, perfect stories. But the cracks I had planted began to show almost immediately. At first, it was subtle. A friend calling her out quietly in a group chat. A cold look from someone who once praised her endlessly. A missed RSVP from an event she assumed she would dominate. She tried to laugh it off, tried to smile as if nothing was wrong. But the panic was there, hidden just beneath the surface. And the more she tried to maintain control, the faster her carefully built facade began to wobble. One afternoon, I received a text from an acquaintance I had cultivated over the past months, a person who liked to gossip, a tiny conduit I had nurtured carefully. Clara is freaking out. People are asking questions. Her fiancé is suspicious. Things are getting messy. I smiled at the message, feeling that familiar sharp thrill in my chest. Messy was exactly what I wanted. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Just knowing the information was moving in the right direction was enough. Later that day, I saw the first real signs. Clara stormed into a local boutique, her usual poised demeanor gone. She shouted at the staff over a minor mistake. Her voice, sharp, brittle. A regular customer, someone who knew both of us, whispered to me later, "She's stressed. Something's off." I nodded politely, hiding the satisfaction curling in my chest. Her perfect life had always been a performance. Every smile she gave, every Instagram post, every laugh, it was a show. And shows crumble the moment the audience stops believing. I watched her carefully, learning her patterns. I noted the way she reacted to stress, the little insecurities she tried to hide, the cracks in her armor she didn't even realize existed. And then I used them. At a charity gala Clara attended. A few weeks later, I made sure the right people noticed her. I let her missteps accumulate, a slightly wrong comment, a missed handshake, a joke that didn't land. Nothing overt, nothing I could be blamed for. Just tiny nudges, gentle pushes. In the shadows. By the end of the evening, whispers were circulating. Clara's face was pale, her composure fraying. She didn't know it yet, but the game was turning against her. And the more she tried to fix it, the worse it got. Meanwhile, my parents remained oblivious, or so they thought. I had taken my first steps against Clara quietly, making sure my actions couldn't be traced back to me. But they too were about to feel the consequences of their neglect, because I had learned that power is about leverage, and they had given me plenty of it. Every slight, every cold word, every moment they chose Clara over me. I had stored it, and now it was currency. The first domino had fallen, and now the storm was moving faster. One evening, Emily curled up on the sofa with a drawing she had made at school, a picture of our little family, smiling, happy, safe. She handed it to me with a shy grin. "Look, Mama, that's us. You, me, and Daddy." Safe. I hugged her tightly, inhaling the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her trust. Yes, baby, I whispered. Safe. And stronger than ever. Because not only was Emily safe, she was my motivation. Every plan, every whisper, every careful maneuver I made against my family was to protect her and ensure she would never feel invisible again. And as Clara's world began to crumble in tiny, deliberate steps, I knew this was just the beginning. I had tasted the first hint of control, the first flicker of triumph, and I would not stop. By now, Clara was no longer the untouchable golden child. Her carefully curated life was fraying at the edges, and the first signs of panic were visible in her posture, her tone, her forced smiles. But my revenge was no longer subtle whispers, it was time to escalate. I turned my attention to my parents. They had spent decades assuming I would remain silent, obedient, invisible. They had taken their favorite daughters, paid for every major family event, dismissed my pain at every turn, and refused to acknowledge my daughter's suffering. Their pride had made them careless, and that carelessness was now their weakness. The first step was their social standing. My mother thrived on admiration in the community. My father, on the image of financial and moral superiority. Both depended on people believing they were untouchable pillars of respect. I began quietly feeding small truths, barely noticeable, to mutual acquaintances. The kind of truths that seemed innocent at first, but gained weight as they spread. My father had made some risky business decisions that weren't as stable as he claimed. My mother had been passing off old clothes as designer gifts to maintain appearances at community events. Clara's recent engagement troubles were now public knowledge, and whispers of family dysfunction began to circulate. Every bit of gossip was like a pin to a balloon. Tiny punctures that, over time, would collapse their perfect image, and I made sure the rumors reached the right people. Influential neighbors, colleagues, socialites who prided themselves on knowing the real story. Then I turned back to Clara. I orchestrated a small accidental exposure, a mismanaged social media post that revealed her engagement problems. It wasn't obvious enough to be traced to me, but the right eyes saw it. The fallout was immediate. Her fiancé confronted her, confused and suspicious. Friends withdrew from her circle. Comments online became sharper, more critical. And Clara, she was desperate to repair the damage, but she didn't know where it had started. I watched from the sidelines, patient, silent, calculating. Meanwhile, my parents began to sense the first tremors. Invitations they had always received automatically were delayed or never arrived. Their calls to influential contacts were met with politeness, not the deference they expected. The anxiety began to show in subtle ways. My mother's hands shook slightly when she poured tea during social events. My father's voice grew harsher, less confident in meetings with colleagues. Clara's tension radiated like electricity. It fed back into their own stress, creating a chain reaction. And all of it was because of me. I never acted openly. I never accused. I never made a scene. That would have been too easy to dismiss. Instead, I stayed in the background, a quiet force guiding the dominoes into place. Every misstep, every embarrassment, every whisper of doubt was like a puzzle piece falling perfectly into place. And every night, after Emily went to sleep, I documented it all. Every reaction, every subtle panic, every crack in their armor, because I knew revenge is most powerful when it's inevitable, when the target doesn't know what's coming until it's already too late. One evening, after a small community gala, where my parents had made fools of themselves in subtle ways, mispronounced names, flustered interactions, accidentally revealed family secrets. I sat with Emily at home, sipping tea. She leaned against me, still wearing her little princess bracelet from a gift Daniel had given her earlier. "Mama, are they going to be okay?" she asked, half innocent, half curious. I kissed her forehead gently. "Oh, baby, they'll be fine, but not in the way they think. They're learning that actions have consequences." She smiled sleepily and nestled into my lap. And I realized in that moment that my revenge was no longer about anger alone. It was about justice. It was about protecting my daughter. It was about reclaiming everything they had tried to take from me. The storm was coming, and soon my parents and Clara would realize that the little girl they ignored, the one they thought they could overlook forever, was not just standing up, she was standing tall, and she would not stop. Clara had always relied on one thing above all: perception. Her entire life was carefully constructed, polished, filtered, and edited both online and offline. She believed that if people saw her as perfect, they would never question her, never doubt her, never see the cracks beneath the surface. But now, the cracks were starting to show, and she had no idea who was responsible. It started with subtle whispers. Colleagues exchanged knowing glances when she entered the room. Social media comment shifted from praise to curiosity, and then to thinly veiled criticism. The engagement that once seemed untouchable began to fracture under the weight of suspicion. At a charity luncheon, Clara spilled a drink on a guest's expensive dress while trying to greet a local dignitary. She apologized quickly, but the guest's expression betrayed annoyance. Cameras caught the moment, and by the evening, it was quietly circulating online. I didn't post it. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The seed I had planted earlier, the photograph at the rooftop bar, the careful whispers, the rumors, was blossoming perfectly on its own. Her fiancé, already unsettled by the rumors and inconsistencies in Clara's stories, confronted her publicly during a dinner event. "Clara, what's going on?" he asked quietly but firmly, his eyes sharp. "People are talking. I need to know the truth." Clara froze. She stammered, trying to smooth over the cracks. But the damage had already been done. Her cheeks burned. She looked around, hoping for an ally, perhaps my parents, but even they hesitated. Their carefully curated image of family perfection was already slipping, and uncertainty had replaced confidence. I observed from a distance, careful to remain invisible. But inside, a quiet thrill spread through me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The first time the fear of exposure reached Clara's carefully guarded heart. Clara's panic became visible in subtle ways. Her smile stiffened. Her voice wavered during public speeches. She double-checked every post before hitting share, hesitating in ways she never had before. And every day, the whispers grew louder. Friends began asking questions, acquaintances grew distant, and the foundation of her social world began to crumble. Meanwhile, my parents, who had once treated me and Emily with disdain, began to feel the effects of the storm in their own way. Invitations they once received automatically were now delayed or rescinded. Former business associates who had praised their stability now hesitated to publicly support them. Every misstep, every embarrassment, every subtle loss of control echoed back to them, and they had no idea why. I didn't gloat. Not openly. Revenge is a patient art. It thrives when it is silent, inevitable, and undeniable. I simply observed. I recorded everything. Each reaction, each panic, each flicker of fear that crossed their faces. T night. When Emily slept peacefully beside me, I allowed myself a quiet satisfaction. Not for cruelty, not for malice, but because justice, finally, was coming full circle. I whispered to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. They thought they could ignore you, baby. They thought they could hurt us both. But look, things are changing. And they don't even see it coming. By the end of the week, Clara's veneer of perfection had almost completely cracked. Invitations were rescinded, her fiancé was distant and cold, and friends were cautiously withdrawing. She was beginning to panic publicly, fumbling her words at every interaction. And the best part? She had no idea it was me orchestrating it. The invisible daughter, the one they had always dismissed, was now the silent force behind their unraveling. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Because what was coming next would hit even closer to home. Until now, my revenge had been subtle, almost invisible. Clara had been the first domino, a carefully chosen test of my plan. But my parents, my so-called pillars of guidance, had been quietly observing from the sidelines, blind to the storm building around them. Now, it was time for them to feel the consequences of their choices. It started with their social standing. My mother, who thrived on admiration and influence, began to notice unusual hesitations from the community leaders she once charmed effortlessly. Invitations that arrived without question before were now delayed or never came. Friends who had always praised her in public exchanged wary glances, whispering behind her back. At first, she blamed coincidence. People are busy, she muttered. But the tiny, accumulating slights were undeniable. My father, obsessed with the image of financial and moral stability, faced similar issues. Business associates, who once treated him as untouchable, began questioning decisions, hesitating in meetings, even subtly undermining his authority. Deals that had once been effortless now required painstaking effort to secure, and Clara, already crumbling, was only amplifying their panic. Every public slip she made reflected back on them, a mirror showing the cracks in their facade. I had spent months quietly gathering information, financial inconsistencies, small secrets, moments they had tried to hide from everyone. Now I began letting carefully chosen accidents leak. A friendly conversation with a mutual acquaintance here. A casual comment at a community event there. Nothing traceable to me. Nothing overt, but the effect was immediate. My parents began to doubt themselves. The carefully controlled image they had cultivated for decades began to unravel in subtle, agonizing ways. Invitations rescinded. Conversations with neighbors tinged with skepticism. Friendly smiles replaced by thinly veiled judgment. And every misstep, every awkward interaction, every small public humiliation was magnified in their minds because they didn't know the source. The first direct strike came during a business networking event. My father attempted to showcase his latest project, expecting applause and admiration. But whispers circulated quietly among the attendees. Questions about timelines, contracts, and previous deals began to surface. He tried to respond with confidence, but hesitation crept into his voice. The room, which had once hung on his every word, now murmured behind his back. Later, my mother received subtle rebukes from her social circle about family matters, perfectly timed to make her feel inadequate. Small, carefully planted hints of Clara's crumbling personal life reflected poorly on her judgment and discretion. By the end of the evening, both of them returned home exhausted, confused, and unsettled. I didn't reveal myself. I never needed. 2. Every reaction I observed, the tension in their shoulders, the quick defensive words, the furtive glances exchanged between them, was proof that my plan was working. The storm I had quietly cultivated was no longer confined to whispers. It had reached their doorstep. I sat quietly in my living room that night, Emily asleep beside me, and allowed myself a quiet smile. This was no longer just revenge for myself. This was protection for my daughter. This was justice for the years they had dismissed both of us. And it was only getting started. By the following week, small cracks had grown into visible fissures. Clara's panic had become frantic. My parents' confidence had been replaced with tension, defensiveness, and anxiety, and me. I remained calm, collected, patient, because when they finally realized who had orchestrated everything, the invisible daughter, the mother they had ignored, the woman they thought they could dismiss without consequence, it would be too late. Every secret I had collected, every leverage I had gathered, every strategic move I had planned, would culminate in a reckoning they would never forget, and Emily, my daughter, my anchor through this storm, would never have to experience what I had endured. She would grow up safe, respected, strong, and my parents would finally understand that dismissing me, dismissing Emily, had been their gravest mistake. The day had arrived. Years of neglect, favoritism, and cruelty had culminated into this single moment. And I was ready. I didn't announce myself. I didn't make threats. I let their own arrogance, their own mistakes, and their own carelessness do the work. I simply pulled the final strings. It started subtly, as always. Clara's social circle, already fractured, began receiving evidence of her missteps: texts, photos, and accounts she had thought private. Invitations were rescinded, partnerships dissolved, and her engagement reached a breaking point. For once, she was publicly flustered, panicked, and powerless to spin her perfect narrative. Her frantic calls to my parents only magnified the chaos. "Mom. Dad, you have to help me fix this," she begged. But my parents, who had once turned a blind eye to my daughter's suffering, now faced the very consequences they had avoided: embarrassment, shame, and social isolation. Invitations to events were denied. Friends whispered behind their backs. Business partners questioned their judgment. And I observed in quiet satisfaction, Emily asleep beside me, unaware of the storm her resilience had inspired. The final blow came during a community gala, a gathering that had once been my parents' crowning achievement in social influence. I attended, but as a silent observer, unnoticed and underestimated. Clara stumbled through her speech, her fiancé glaring at her intermittently, and her friends exchanged subtle looks of disbelief. Every whispered conversation carried the weight of exposure. Every glance pointed to her unraveling. My parents attempted to maintain composure, but tension radiated from them. Nervous gestures, forced smiles, and the occasional slip of the tongue betrayed their panic. Their carefully curated image of control and authority was collapsing in real time. And still, they didn't see me. I didn't need to step forward. The dominoes had fallen exactly as I planned. Every misstep, every whispered doubt, every crack in their feuds had been carefully engineered and nurtured. By the end of the night, Clara's tears were visible. My parents' forced smiles were brittle and hollow. Their power, their influence, their so-called perfection all gone. And all because they had ignored the one person who mattered most: me and my daughter. After the gala, as I tucked Emily into bed, I whispered softly, "They thought they could ignore us, baby. They thought they could hurt us and get away with it. But look, they're learning now. And it's over. We're safe and strong. I could feel her tiny hand grip mine tightly, and for the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of closure. Not hatred, not malice, but justice. I had reclaimed what they had tried to take. I had protected my daughter from the neglect and cruelty they had once inflicted, and I had shown them, without raising my voice, without public confrontation, that every slight, every dismissal, every act of cruelty has consequences. They had underestimated me for a lifetime, and they would never make that mistake again. As I watched my daughter sleep, her small chest rising and falling with each breath, I felt a sense of calm that had eluded me for decades. Clara, my parents, their social circle, everything I had meticulously orchestrated had come to fruition. They would spend the rest of their lives remembering the daughter they ignored, the mother they dismissed, and the woman they thought they could never defeat. And I would move forward stronger, wiser, and unshakable, ensuring that Emily would grow up in a world where her worth could never be questioned, her voice could never be silenced, and her mother would always be her shield. The storm had passed. Clara's world lay in disarray. My parents' influence had crumbled. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, I felt something far greater than satisfaction. Peace. I sat by Emily's side one evening, brushing her hair as she giggled at a story I was telling. Her laughter was unburdened, pure. She didn't worry about popularity contests, social whispers, or family expectations. She was free from the cruelty I had endured, free from the neglect my parents had inflicted. That freedom, I realized, was the true victory. Everything else, the whispered rumors, the crumbling reputations, the carefully orchestrated downfall of my family's fad, was simply the byproduct of reclaiming our lives. I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The night at the hospital, when my parents refused to help my daughter, and I realized the depth of their neglect. The months of rebuilding my life, gaining financial independence, and cultivating influence. The careful, patient orchestration of small, strategic moves that exposed the cracks in Clara's perfection and my parents' control. Every step had been deliberate. Every act had been a building block toward empowerment. And now, as I watched Emily play, the weight of my past lifted. Clara, humiliated and isolated, had learned the hard truth: perfection is an illusion, and neglect has consequences. My parents, stripped of their image of infallibility, had learned the same lesson, but I felt no gloating, no malice. I felt clarity, strength, and, most importantly, freedom. I had finally reclaimed my voice. I had protected my daughter. I had built a life where neither of us would ever feel invisible again. Looking toward the future, I knew this was only the beginning of our story, but for the first time, I felt in control. And no one could dictate our worth. No one could dismiss our existence, and that knowledge, our power, was unshakable. I leaned down and kissed Emily's forehead, whispering softly, "Always remember, baby, you are enough, always. And I will always be here to make sure no one ever makes you feel less." Her tiny hand squeezed mine. Her eyes sparkled with trust and love, and I knew, without a doubt, that we had won, not just against my family, but for ourselves. Our future was ours to shape, and for the first time, it felt limitless. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment revenge, so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? What do you want to hear from us in next video? If you have any incident in your life, please let us know. We would love to share your story.